Hi guys, my name's Candice, and today we're talking about how to avoid depression in COVID-19. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between sadness and depression, some of the reasons that we even have sadness, what the function of it is, and some of the things that you can do to cope with it. So to start with, let's just talk about the difference between sadness and depression. Sadness is a natural emotion. It's a natural state of feeling that comes up anytime we lose something. It's a biological function. It's no different than breathing or hunger. So sadness is a really natural state. It's a human-wide experience, right? You can't not have it. Depression is a mental health condition. So depression happens when we don't know how, or we aren't able to process through our thoughts and our feelings about stressful experiences that we're having. So as a therapist, one of the reasons that a lot of times I work with clients who are struggling with depression is because things have happened to them and they either didn't know how to get through their feelings about it or weren't able to work through it safely when it was happening. So that's a little bit about the difference. It's a really important difference because I think one of the most important things for us as we're all going through this, there's going to be a lot of losses and a lot of sadness in many ways, big and small. And I think that one of the most crucial things that we can do is just being informed about what the difference is. We have a tendency to pathologize emotions and to look at anybody who is sad as being depressed or to label ourselves that way. And so I think it's really crucial to understand the difference and a little bit about what you can do with it. So the healthy function of sadness, right? So the last video we were talking about how even unpleasant emotions have a healthy function. So with sadness, the function of it is supposed to come up anytime we have a loss. So by a loss, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone has passed away. It means we've lost a story that we were attached to about how things were supposed to go or how things were going to go. And so we feel this loss of that story because that reality, that future gets taken away and a new one, it shows up in its place, right? So we can feel that anytime we lose a story that we had, whether it's a story about a career path that we were going to be on and that doesn't work out, or even something as simple as I was going to win this game and we lost, a relationship that doesn't pan out the way you thought it would, or a move that doesn't go the way that you thought it would. We feel sadness anytime we have a picture in our minds of what things are supposed to look like and that doesn't happen. And it comes up, right? The function of sadness, why it comes up in those moments is because we have to feel the loss in order to let go of the old story and to attach to the new one, whether that is attaching to the new story of what it looks like in this other job that I'm in now as opposed to the one I thought I would be in, or reattaching to what it looks like to be single again after a relationship hasn't worked out. So sadness really gives us this function of being able to let go to what we no longer have and to reattach to what we now have, right? So it helps us to move through losses so that we don't get stuck. And that's a really key thing. All emotions, sadness included, have physical feelings that come with you when you're feeling it, right? And those feelings are universal, right? So our bodies register the feelings in the same ways worldwide. So a little bit about what sadness feels like is sadness is very heavy. So sadness is, you know that you're sad anytime you feel, there's a couple of different things and it depends on the person. Most people when they're sad, they feel like there's lead in them. Like they've got, like they put on a suit made of lead and they are weighed down. Which makes everybody really tired when they're sad. A lot of times if it's a really big loss, we'll feel a pressing feeling in the chest area. It's like a hole in your heart. And that's a really common feeling with sadness. Another feeling that most people feel that's ironically not a piece of sadness, but comes along with it a lot of times, is a feeling in your throat. It's a feeling like the sadness is rising up in your throat And that is actually, that comes from us trying to shut sadness down, right? So it's kind of like if you feel like you're going to be sick and you don't want to be, it's like we choke back our sadness. And so it creates this feeling of choking because we try and stifle it. So that's not actually a natural feeling of sadness, but it's one a lot of us have because we've learned over time to shut it down. The other thing about emotions that's really important to understand is, like we were talking about in the last video, all emotions have healthy impulses that come with them, right? They push us to do some sort of helpful action that would help us to work through the feeling. So with sadness, we get a few common urges worldwide. We get the urge to cry, right? That's an obvious one. We get the urge to isolate, not necessarily to be alone, but to be either alone or only around people that we feel safe letting our guard down. We get the impulse to seek things that are comforting to us, so whether that is a safe space in your home, or in the shower, or somebody's dining room table, wherever you feel comforted, right? We can also seek comfort with objects, right? So comfy blankets, comfy pillows, a favorite pair of pajama pants, whatever it is, right? We get that impulse when we're sad to seek out things that comfort us. And the other impulse that a lot of people don't realize, but we all do, is we have the impulse to salvage. So when we have a loss, we have the impulse to salvage whatever we can. And that's our natural way of trying not to let go of everything, trying not to, quote unquote, like throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So we see that a lot of times, for example, if a home burns down, right? So if somebody's house catches on fire, and our natural instinct is afterwards to go looking through the wreckage, right? And seeing what can be salvaged from this. Are there old pictures? Are there clothes? Are there teddy bears? Or there's something that we can pull from this? We do the same thing when we lose a loved one, right? We try and salvage what we can. We salvage our memories of them, the time that we've spent with them. We salvage the traits that they've handed down to us, right? So traits that they have instilled in us in the time that we've spent with them. We salvage ways that they have impacted our lives in positive ways, right? So we essentially take a loss and we try and keep whatever we can hold on to so we don't have to throw everything out, right? So those are some of the impulses that come up with sadness, and they all help us to work through the sadness. So when you're sad, actually allowing yourself to do those things, right? To cry, to seek comfort, to surround yourself with either people that allow you to have those feelings or to be alone, and to try and salvage whatever you can. Those are all really healthy ways of working through sadness. So one of the things I think it's important to talk about is how sadness and depression can look similar, but also how they're very different. So we'll use the example of losing a loved one because that's something that I think most people understand, and unfortunately many people are going to experience right now. So I think it's a really important one to talk about. So sadness, right? So the healthy emotional function of sadness. This is what it would look like if you lose a loved one for most people. You cry. You cry a lot. You cry until you feel spent and exhausted, or until you get to a place of calm. A lot of times when we let ourselves cry, we get to a place of peace after a while. And obviously with losing a loved one, this is not a one and done cry, right? This may be something that you do hundreds of times, if you allow yourself, right? You'll feel heavy, right? Like we were talking about. You'll feel that weight on your chest, or like you've got that lead suit on, right? You feel kind of weighed down. You'll isolate yourself whenever you feel the sadness coming up for you. And initially, you'll try and spend time either alone or around people who let you be sad, right? Because when we're sad, we don't want to be around people who force us to put on a happy face, right? And you'll seek out comfort, those places in your house or the objects that you have that are comforting to you, right? Fuzzy blankets or pets, things like that. And other things are just important to know about it, right? So if you're feeling that sadness and you're processing that, the pain's going to come in waves. Initially, very close together, right? So if you've ever been to the beach when you were a kid and you felt the waves coming, and right, and you get that chance to kind of breathe between them, right? I grew up by the ocean, and I remember this feeling and being really terrified that I wasn't tall enough to jump over the waves, right? And so I would go under them, and then between them I would get a chance to breathe. And sadness is very much like that. And in the beginning, when you first lose a loved one, if you're processing that sadness, it might feel like it's just wave after wave after wave. And then you get a really short break, and you get to catch your break, you get to catch your breath, and then it's wave after wave after wave. And over time, what you'll notice if you're processing your sadness is the waves start to space out, right? So you'll get a wave, you'll get a break. You'll get a wave, you'll get a break. And that's really important because we need that time to come up for air, right? To live our normal life for a little while before another wave comes. And a lot of times people feel guilty about that, but it's also really crucial, right, for our recovery when we're sad, when we're going through losses, is to give yourself permission to breathe during the break. Give yourself permission to live your normal life, right? You don't forget. But to live your normal life in the breath between the waves of grief, right? The waves of sadness. And a lot of times what you'll notice over time is that the waves start to space out even further. And then you'll have a wave of grief that comes on almost out of nowhere when something reminds you of that loss, when something reminds you of that person. You hear their favorite song, or you see something that reminds you of a trip you took with them. And all of a sudden it's like it was yesterday, for a moment. And the best thing you can do is just give yourself permission to have that moment, to have that wave come up for you, let it go through you, come back out the other side, and breathe. So what we know about sadness is that if you are processing your losses in a healthy way, that over time, over a longer period of time, you'll start to reattach to the future. You'll start to reattach to what your life looks like without that person, and you'll start to find little pieces of joy and meaning again. And one of the mistakes that we often make is kicking ourselves for this and feeling really terrible about this. But this is actually a healthy function of processing your sadness in a really healthy way, as you start to find meaning in life again. And it doesn't mean that you don't miss that person, you're not sad about them, or that you wish it had happened. It's just naturally what starts to happen when we let our sadness come up and out. And over a much, much, much longer period of time after a loss, most people start to find a sense of gratitude for that person and for the part that they played in the story of your life. And so that's a little bit about what sadness looks like. For example, when you lose a loved one, when you're processing it in a healthy way. And somebody looking in from the outside might try and set limits on how long you're allowed to be sad, or tell you to cheer up, or tell you it could have been worse, or 1,000 really unhelpful things. But ultimately, this is what sadness looks like if you are grieving in a healthy way, if you're letting yourself feel it, if you're letting it come up and out, giving yourself permission for that. And that looks very different from depression. So depression is also something that we can have when we lose a loved one. So it's important to know kind of what that looks like. So with depression, you might cry or you might not. If you cry, you might jump all over yourself or shame yourself or criticize yourself for crying, for being weak in your mind, or you might tell yourself that you don't deserve to be sad because other people have it worse than you. You might tell yourself, you don't deserve to be sad because you weren't good enough to that person. Whatever it is that you come up with, right? So you might come up with all these different ways to really shut down your sadness. A lot of times if you are struggling with depression after you lose a loved one, you isolate yourself from most, if not everyone, and really look for opportunities to be alone as much as possible, which means that unlike with healthy sadness and coping, a lot of times you'll shut out other people's attempts to connect with you, to comfort you, to support you. And with depression, it's really easy to shut everybody out, right? One of the other things with depression is a lot of times you'll do your best not to feel sad, right? So you try to shut it off, try and push it down, try and not have that. It's scary, it's bad, it's weak, it's overwhelming, whatever it is, you try not to have it. And you fail at that because, like I said, sadness is as natural as breathing or hunger. So when you fail at that, you decide to feel nothing instead. And unfortunately, over time, we do have this ability, so you'll succeed and you start to go numb. You start to have a hard time feeling good or bad. You start to spend most of your time in that kind of emotional middle ground of nothingness, not feeling particularly attached to or hurt by anything. And this over time starts to feel a lot worse than sadness. If you've ever been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that feeling of what is the point? Because when we start to go numb, we really start to lose our motivation, our drive to do things, right? Because if we don't have feelings, then what's the point of doing things? It's like eating when you can't taste anything, right? So we lose that drive. And ironically, right, all this effort to shut your sadness out, your sadness is still humming back there in the background. And it's still making you feel heavy and tired all the time. It's just kind of humming in the background back there. And what we see most of the time with somebody who's suffering from depression, even after they've lost a loved one, is after a while, you start to just feel bad about yourself for feeling so bad, right? And over time, it becomes more and more like you have personally failed at life rather than what's actually happening, which was you had pain and you didn't know what to do with it. And so you shut it off. This becomes such a habit that a lot of times we start criticizing ourselves. Our self-esteem takes a nosedive. And if it goes on long enough, it has a tendency to become suicidal thoughts, right? So we go from pain to suppressing it to numbness to suicidal thoughts. That's not a far jump for most people. A lot of times suicidal thoughts come up naturally. It's what our mind does whenever we shove our pain down. We don't know what to do with it. And the mind starts thinking up ways to escape it. It's really important to know, I want to mention this, that suicide is not the solution. I know that with COVID-19, there are so many losses, and one of my fears is the massive amounts of suicidal thoughts that are going to come up for people because we don't know how to deal with this pain, right? We don't know how to deal with this loss. And suicide is not the solution to this. Allowing yourself to feel those feelings in a safe way, in a safe place, is the solution. And if you've never done that, then you're going to need the help of a therapist or some very supportive family and friends. And it takes practice, right? So if you've gotten really good at shutting off your feelings, then it's going to take a lot of practice of giving yourself permission. So some of the losses that I'm really expecting that we will see with COVID and that we've already started to see is the first loss is the loss of routine, right? The loss of normalcy, right? The loss of what our life ordinarily looks like, right? So we have that story of what our week looks like, what our month looks like, what our year is going to look like. That story's all been taken away. And now we have a very different story, right? For what our week looks like, what our month looks like, what our year looks like. That's a loss. Not a devastating one in the way that losing a loved one is, but it's a loss. We have a loss of connection, right? So we have a loss of opportunity for connection. With all the social distancing and the isolation going on, one of the other things that I've seen coming up with my clients a lot is a loss of direction, right? So if ordinarily your motivation for doing things is fueled by external demands, right? So demands placed by your job, by appointments, that you have to be at a certain place at a certain time and do certain things every day. Sometimes that can be what you rely on for your momentum. And so there can be a loss of momentum when you just lose that direction, right, from that external source. And so having to give that up and essentially reattach to this new story of self-generated direction, right, which is hard. It's something that if you haven't done before or you're not used to, it feels really uncomfortable. One of the things that we're noticing, right, I've had a lot of friends that have had to cancel plans or celebrations, weddings, special events that you were looking forward to, graduations, and it's a loss, right? You have imagined what that would look like, and now it's either going to look very different or it's not happening at all. And that's sad, right? Giving yourself permission to validate that loss, to validate that feeling. One of the smaller ones, but that I've noticed, coming up in my own life, and I've heard other people mention it, is just the loss of convenience in the sense of losing our normal way of doing things. So, for example, if you have a thought about what you would like to make for dinner, ordinarily in our normal life, we can swing by the store on the way home from work and pick up the couple of ingredients that we're missing, and ta-da, we can make the thing that we want. But we've lost that now, right? Because now going to the store is an ordeal. Now it's For a lot of people, we're trying to figure out how to make do with what we have at our house, how to make fewer trips to the store to expose ourselves less to germs, and it changes the way that we live. And that's a loss. It's a tiny one, but it's a loss. One of the ones that I've noticed coming up for a lot of people also is because we are, for a lot of us, living in newly populated spaces, right? We're not used to spending that much time in our homes with all the people home at the same time. And so there's a loss of privacy. So that's something that, we can salvage, right? But losing that sense of alone time that we usually get maybe on our drive to work, or, when you get home from work before your spouse, or, you're home before the kids get home, or, usually we have a fair amount of privacy in our lives, and that seems to be really shifting right now. A loss of our sense of safety, right? Our ability to move freely and safely in the world in the way that we have gotten used to. A loss of certainty, right? Like I said, like a loss of knowing what the rest of our year is going to look like. That's a loss. And obviously the biggest one, right, that for a lot of us we haven't realized yet, or hasn't happened for us yet, but it is already happening around the globe, is the loss of loved ones, right? Is we don't know who we're going to lose. We all have people that we are terrified to lose. And that's going to be the biggest loss. But every single one of the things on this list is going to generate some feeling of sadness or disappointment for you. They will be different sizes, right? Based on the loss, based on how attached you are to it, right? I'm a lot more attached to my mom than I am to, right, my plans that I had in May, right? There's going to be a difference there, right? Obviously, right? So your sadness is going to register in different ways depending on the size of the loss. As far as coping, so some of the things that you can do to cope with sadness in a healthy way, right, and try and not let it turn into depression, is one, just giving yourself permission to have it, recognizing that it is a function of the body. It is no different than breathing or hunger, and it's supposed to be there. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you are broken or that you're selfish or any of these things. Another important thing is staying active. So keep moving, because stagnation increases our risk of depression. So if that means going for a walk once a day, or even just getting up and getting around your house, right? If you feel like your health is too high risk and you don't even want to leave your house, walking around your house as much as you can, right? So don't spend the whole day on the couch. Don't spend the whole day sitting at your desk. Get up, move around. Eating healthy. So we know from research that nutrition-dense foods, so healthy foods, right, high protein, vegetables, they've been shown to play a key role in regulating our neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals in our brain that allow us to feel happy, or conversely, to feel depressed. And so nutrient deficient foods, right? So foods that are really low in the nutrients that we need have been shown to really increase our susceptibility to depression, right? Because without, for example, enough protein, we start to notice that our brain doesn't make enough of the neurotransmitters that help to balance our mood out. So be mindful of what you're eating. Do not increase your alcohol intake. A lot of people are really stressed right now, and we have a tendency to grab for whatever we can to shut our feelings off. Increasing your alcohol right now will only increase the likelihood of this turning into depression for you, and you coming out of this with depression and possibly a new addiction on top of everything else that you're dealing with. Please don't do that to yourself. Don't increase your caffeine intake. A lot of people are drinking more coffee, they're more home, they're trying to get things done, they're trying to stay busy in order to avoid their feelings. Slow down, give yourself some space. Speaking of space, right, that loss of privacy, find a space that is just yours. So a space that you can go to in your home or near your home or in your yard when you need alone time, when you need space to be able to be with your feelings. Let yourself cry. So when you are sad, let yourself cry. If it is one tear or two over plans that have now gone out the window, okay. If it is a lot of tears over having to cancel your graduation or your wedding, or if you are sobbing over the loss of a loved one or the loss of a job, let yourself cry. There is a lot of research around the function of allowing yourself to cry, right? That there are actually different chemical makeup in our tears when we are sad. There's cortisol in our tears when we're sad, which is, I don't know if you know what cortisol is, but it is the stress hormone in the body. And when we're sad, it overwhelms our system. And so crying is actually a way to remove that from our body, right? So giving yourself permission to cry. And if you can't, watch sad movies. If you need some help, right? Watch some Marley and Me. Validate your feelings. So just give yourself permission to have it. Like I said, it is a physical, natural function of the body. Let yourself feel it. Stay connected to people who let you have your feelings, even the unpleasant ones. And if you don't already have those people in your life, then make a list of places or people that you can connect with, online support groups or crisis chat hotlines where people are trained to let you have your feelings, right? One of the biggest trainings that people on crisis support lines go through is letting you have your feelings, right? Not shutting you down, not minimizing it, not telling you, but other people have it worse. Any number of the really unhelpful things that people in our lives tend to do when we're feeling sad. So find places, if you don't have those people in your life already, call the crisis line. They, I promise you, will give you permission to feel your feelings. Last but not least, if you take a little bit of time, at least 20 minutes a day, to check in with your feelings in private without distractions. Most of us are not wired to access our most vulnerable feelings when we're busy or we're in public places. We just aren't wired to do that. That's like if you had an injury, right? You wouldn't stop in the middle of a crowded concert to tend to it. As far as salvage whatever you can, right? So if you have lost your routine and you aren't getting up and getting in your car and going to work every day like you used to, salvage what you can from it. Get up at the same time. Get ready as if you were going to work, right? Try and keep your schedule as similar as you can. So salvage whatever you can. Make space for your feelings in moderation, right? So don't fall into them, right? Do not shut yourself into them and wallow in them. Make space for them, but in moderation, and don't shut them out. Thank you. I hope this was helpful. And if there are other videos you'd like to see, please leave some topics in the comments and I will do what I can.